Yeah, yeah.
Recording in progress. Kurt.
It's funny. Like I'm just jumping in real quick. I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to interview you, of course, with all the things in with Nora Bateson and all that. Like, but that's probably a whole other discussion.
It was Kurt, it was awesome. And you froze for a second, and hopefully it won't be too bad. I think I want to make sure the internet up here. I'm gonna I'm gonna try. This is risky, but I'm gonna move my internet. Hold on. I just changed the internet. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can hear you. You're not coming in yet. Nope. Okay, I got some visual. I got
Now
some head bobbing. Yeah,
that should be a better signal.
that seems better.
Okay, so now we can start. But dude, I'll tell you real quick, man. It was amazing. I was very much the London trip. I remember I looked it up, and she was doing that in-person training, and it
Mm,
was something that I read about, and I've been using a lot of her theory
mm,
in not only in my dissertation but then in some other writing. And what I was very interested about was, as I grow the center and do data collection of some sort, I'm adamant about it being qualitative, really showing the heart and soul of who we are and the work that we do, and fighting against the
mm,
other, what I would call cold data or statistical kind of analysis of mental health journeying and holistic health work. And so when I saw warm data and she was doing that training, I was like, well, this is great. Because if I ever do
okay.
research, it'll be using these methodologies much more so than others. And so it was awesome, man.
Yeah. That makes okay. So yeah, thanks for describing that. Because when I saw the warm data thing, I was like, I didn't do a complete deep dive in that, but I was like, what does warm data even mean, right? Like, where did she
Yeah.
even come up with this name? So that makes sense. But it's the cold data is the sterilization, right, of quantitative and numbers, objectivity. It's like we're not trying to collect that because that loses the essence of the human
And she says
experience.
very specifically, she's like, look, all of that data is good and it has a place and it serves a role,
True.
but
That's true.
it's unbalanced in that it misses. And what how she defines warm data is a transcontextual view or study of complex systems. And
Mm,
she uses the term transcontextual to look at the connections and the webbing and the tapestry of many different fields that
mm,
oftentimes get severed from one another. So we
mm.
talk about politics, spirituality, ecology, family, media, technology.
Yeah.
These things usually get pulled out of the contextual webbing that they're in and be
Mm,
constantly influenced by and studied kind of in a silo. And
mm,
so she's wanting to look at all the relationships between and the way that they impact one another and inform one
mm,
another. But dude, it was outrageous.
mm,
It was like 60 people from all across the world. She's trained about 800 hosts in warm data. Um, and we do these breakout sessions where they separate us into groups of four. And she would start with a question, and then we would take that question, and oftentimes it was like, what is home in a changing world? And then you'd go sit in your groups, and in each group a piece of paper with a word written on it was on the middle of the floor, and the
mm,
context were family, ecology, media, technology, health, spirituality. And Kurt, the only rule, you can process and talk about whatever you want, try and bring in the question. So you'd sit down at family and try and go, what is home in an ever changing world in the context of family? And then at
mm,
any point, you can get up and move
Hmm.
for an hour.
Hmm. You can
And
get up and move, like go to another group or just leave or
at
just
any point,
whatever you feel prompted or
somebody
just
could be
whatever's coming
talking
up for you.
mid-sentence and you could get up.
Wow.
And that was hard for me. I was like, I can't do that. But dude,
Shit.
it started to flow. And then we'd have this process. You'd start to carry whatever conversation you took from one context into the other. And it
Hmm.
would build in what she calls mores, which are kind of like layering, like you're putting a pattern here and then here and then here. And in art, it's like the 3D pictures that you look at and you have to relax your eyes
Yeah.
to see the figure.
Yeah.
It's the layering of those. So you'd have this contextual conversation, but then it would move to another context, and some people would be sharing interpersonally, talking very much about their own home life and family, and other people would be talking abstractly about theory, about study, and it was all these context
Hmm.
building. And then we take all this time and kind of unravel and process. And dude, the stimulation of thought was beautiful. So
Wow.
and then I'll shut up, I swear.
Yeah,
But
no, no, I love this. Yeah.
she's come up with so many incredible terms. And if you remember her grandfather, William Bateson, he coined the term genetics.
Oh shit, really? I
I
didn't know that.
know. And so his
Whoa.
son, Gregory Bateson, coined a couple terms: double bind, um,
Double bind, I know that.
gizmogenesis,
Ismogenesis?
schismo.
Oh, schismogenesis. No, not familiar with that. No.
So she went all into Gregory Bateson's work on schismogenesis, which really just means schismo, meaning a break, and genesis, a becoming, a
Mm.
beginning. And so she would talk about how systems, different ecological systems, family systems, structured systems will oftentimes, in their relationship with one another, they will form and break in different ways. And so she talked about 3 different types of schismogenesis, but then she coined 2 different terms. One is symathesy, SYM, and then mathesy, which basically translates to learning together
Mm.
in mutual connection with one another, a collective
Mm.
learning. And then my
Yeah.
favorite, dude, you ready for this word? She's fire. I love her, man. But she coined another term called aphani poesis.
What is it?
Aphani poesis. It's APHANI, aphani, and poesis, POIESIS.
A
And
funny
it's
poesis. I mean, it's beautiful. It sounds beautiful.
so, dude, it's like, but it was and aphani poesis is, she juxtaposes it to the term insidious.
Hmm.
So when something
Hmm.
is insidious, it's growing, it's forming, but it's doing it in a very subtle way, in an
Yeah.
unseen way. You
The
can't really.
unseen. Yeah. There's like a darkness element to it. I think
Yes,
about like the rhizomes, right? Like there's something that's kind of growing and connecting
yes. And when
underneath
it's
the surface.
insidious, it's moving towards something inherently damaging or hurtful or harmful to a system. So she's juxtaposing aphani poesis as the unseen coalescence towards vitality.
Hmm.
What are the unseen elements and influence that are happening in our interactions with one another, in society and family and ecology, the things that we're not measuring, that we're not looking at, that are very subtle, that are impacting these beautiful awakenings and vitality and formations and
Wow.
strengthening relationships. Yeah, like awesome.
Wow.
So here I am, dude, coming away, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to write an article called Aphani poesis and radical youth work. I'm going to write another
Mm.
article about neurodiversity, being on a Aphani poesis towards systemic awakening and conscious expansion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome stuff, man. And so I
All
well,
the creative influence, right? The creative juices are flowing right now, man.
1,000%. And then I'm working on
Yes.
an article with Hans and another professor out at KSU, Matthew Lyons, and it's on health as a social construct. And I was already preemptively, not even knowing, was pulling in Nora Bateson's work with transcontextual in there. So now I get to add some of the worm data.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool.
That's
And
so cool, man.
it connects very much to round two. I don't mean to set this up like a boxing match, like it's Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, dude. But round two of Dr. Kurt Youngberg and
Yes,
talking
sir.
about your practice, a praxis, which I want to dive into. But I'll kind of let you lead because I know we left off and we had all these talking points, and we were talking a lot about your ecological integrity and the work, the integrative work that you're doing with that, with nature, with spirit, with mind, body, soul, holistic work. But what I really want to I'm excited about is, dude, the new office that you have that's right beside freaking Kennesaw State
Yes.
battlefield, which is like a massively healing terrain for me personally. When I
Mm.
was going through my own addiction recovery stuff, man, I went to Kennesaw Mountain every single day and would
Did
hike.
you?
Dude, I'd hike for 3 hours. And my only goal was I'm not going to use, I know when I'm up on that mountain, I feel some type of peace. And so I'd bring music, I'd bring a journal, I'd bring some snacks, water bottles, and I'd just ride up to Kennesaw Mountain. I'd park on Burnt Hickory and I'd walk up the back way of the mountain. I'd hike all the way to the visitors center and then I'd hike back. And there were several spots that I'd just stop
Mm.
and meditate, do breath work, pray. It was beautiful, man. So
Mm.
Kennesaw is very near and dear to my heart, and I think it's
Mm.
awesome. So I'll let you dive in.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad to hear that, man. I'm so glad to hear that you have that personal connection to Kennesaw because, like, shit, I mean, it speaks to the now, right, and what we're trying to do here at Praxis, but it also speaks again from my own personal experiences with Kennesaw in a very, very similar way. Not surprising, man. Like I would even in the throes of the PhD, right, when I was grinding, trying to build a business, trying to stay on top of the reading list by Dr. John Roberts, that madman, right?
That
Um,
was, dude. I remember culture and subjectivity, and I remember just like getting lost, being like, shit. And dude, every time Dr. Roberts he'd sit back and he'd let people talk, and then he'd always touch his head like this.
yeah,
He had a
yes,
shaved head,
yes.
and as we were talking, and I think I picked up on that mannerism at one point when I shaved my head. I noticed it like in team meetings, and I'd be like, "Yes,
The embodiment of Dr. John Roberts right there. And that usually was right before he would spring into action and just deliver this beautiful expose on the things that we were talking about. I'm like, this guy's a genius, man.
yeah,
Just absolute genius. But like that, so Kennesaw Mountain, back up on that, like that was a place of refuge for me. You know, like that I'd find moments of what am I doing? I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed as hell. I'm feeling panic build up and I would just go get up, park over by the Pigeon Hill trailhead, so over off Burnt Hickory, and kind of jet in over there by this creek. I had this little spot I'd go, and I'd just same thing, man. Just go meditate, relax, kind of just drop into the to the forest, to the ecology of the forest, and everything going on. And that was a refuge for my soul during that time.
beautiful."
And it's a really fascinating thing when you think about the origin story of Kennesaw Mountain too, right? We both identify with this sense of this place being a place of peace, of serenity, of calmness, of restoration. But that's not where it came from within the last 200 years, right? You know, Kennesaw is known for being a battlefield of the Civil War, right? And so in this place, there's calamity, there's destruction, there's death, there's chaos, there's the horrors of war, right? And I just find that to be, I think, actually a really relevant and fascinating kind of juxtaposition that we find in nature too. You know, I'm there's a lot I want to say about a lot of these things, right? But there's these themes of like good and bad and light and dark, and these dualities, and just destruction and creativity, and as I'm talking about the relationship with Kennesaw Mountain and that kind of that history of destruction, but also in our experience of healing, I see the same kind of duality in nature, right? That
Yeah,
there's this sense of this benevolent nature that heals, that is rejuvenative, restorative at the same time. And I think there's not a big enough conversation around this, especially in the field of ecology or ecotherapy, ecopsychology, is the darker side of nature, right? And the shadow side of this malevolent force that again, it's not good or bad, it's just the inherent tendency towards destruction, right? And that this this aspect of nature is also something that is really, really profound and very important in my own story, and it touches on a very, very deep level, and has influenced me in very profound ways in my own life, and it is something I try to find a way to kind of bring into my work, when I'm doing more kind of immersive, nature immersive, or even these excursions, these big adventure therapy, travels, adventure therapy. And I at some point I would like to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about that, going back a little bit and talking about some of these personal experiences,
yeah,
because I think in order to understand me and understand a praxis, and what I'm trying to do, kind of have to drop into some of that and kind of
absolutely.
paint that picture for sure. But yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled to finally announce to the world, like, Praxis has moved. We are right across the street, like literally from my office window. You can see the entrance sign to Kennesaw. I
Dude,
haven't counted the steps particularly. I haven't counted them yet, but I think it's probably around 50 to 75 steps it takes to actually get into Kennesaw. And this has been years in the making in terms of trying to find the right location for a praxis. It's trying to find the place where you have amazing access, but also the right physical space that can kind of tie these things in together. And I'd been looking at this area over here 4 years ago when I was originally starting to kind of think about next steps in growing a private practice, and doors closed in that regard. But 4 years later, full circle, come back to this space and found this space, and jumped on it just so I could more fully bring the vision of a praxis to life. So as it stands, we have, so we've grown. We have 4 clinicians. So I've just signed on two extra clinicians. I have clinical director Becky Wofford, who is been lovely in kind of being by my side and helping me kind of get this place established. And the way that I see Becky and her, just the way that she infuses this kind of this sentimentality, or this kind of this very emotional kind of place of, I mean, she's a trained EFT psychotherapist,
awesome.
and
For
I
those that don't
purposely,
know, emotionally focused therapy.
yeah, wait, say that again.
For those that don't know, EFT, emotionally
EFT,
focused therapy.
that's right. So I had approached Becky to join a praxis, or just to kind of be a part of it in whatever form or fashion, probably a year and a half ago, and my intent was because, again, kind of go back to that idea of eco psychology, is trying to bridge the connection to nature, right? Is to kind of look at our human nature relationality. And I saw Becky and Becky's work with couples and with individuals, and being emotionally focused, an EFT therapist. And I was like, this is a beautiful way to kind of bring in the heart of connection, right, with others, and ultimately with the goal of trying to become more connected to nature, is to infuse the heart centeredness, right, the emotional depth. And so I approached her not thinking she was actually going to want to do it, but I was just like, this is I'm just Hail Marrying this one. And she graciously was like, yeah, like
Awesome.
almost without a second thought, man. And it was like, and that's a whole other story there in itself, in the way that that was a synchronicity for her, in her life. And I don't want to share, too much of that, but it just really lined up in a very beautiful way. So she joined me, and we partnered to create, the center, right? And I'm just thrilled at where it is now, and where the possibilities of where we're going with this. And again, we're only a year out now, and for sure, this first 8 9 months was a slow learning process. We struggled to kind of get things going, but I think ultimately what required was the sacrifice to be able to say, like, we need the physical space, like we need to create this home, right? You talk about the home, like this I see as a home, right? It's I mean, and for me, home is the eco, and according to that's where we get from the Greeks, from oikos is where we get the term eco. Oikos is home, right? It means our home, right? So
I didn't know. Yeah.
ecopsychology or ecology is the study of our home, when we kind of think about it in that term, right? It's just very much as you were saying, it's a dynamic system of relationships contained in a home,
Yeah.
right? And so we needed this space, and making that sacrifice, which was huge, as you know, man, like, goodness gracious, like, you've
You
been,
did
first
it
off,
much smarter when you said first year's been like a slow learning process. I just threw it out like the first year was just me getting punched in the face, the fastest learning process in the world. But Kurt, I mean, you were very intentional and strategic and had a very clear vision. And it requires tremendous sacrifice. But it's so beautiful to watch you align your vision and bring it together. And I love talking to you, man.
yeah, man, I appreciate that. And I don't know if I said it enough last time, but you've been a huge inspiration for me, brother. Like, in watching you bring your vision, your goals, your dreams to life, in this way, and in your way, has been massively inspirational in me. And seeing you go through it, seeing you do it, has been like a drive for me. It's like, dude, Wes is going after it, like I'm going after it. Like, it's been, so that's just been awesome, man.
Dude,
I just want to say thank you for that.
it's
Thank you for being the
absolutely.
inspiration.
Well, that was never my intention. My intention was always just like, it was really for the families and for the youth, and just being like, okay, I'm going to build this for them. But to know that that inspired others means more than anything, man. And I was trying to get you to come work for me the whole time, and still probably am, dude. I'm like, let's just wait like 10 years, man. There's going to be some mutual coalescing of a praxis and eternal strength in this beautiful fucking compound. Who knows, man? But
Yes, no, I know that was something that we lost on the first go around of this, was like, that was I think a really significant moment in our relationship, man. Like, for those that are listening to this, we talked a little bit about how Wes and I met in the PhD program, and how we had we learned. And I was trying to remember, like, the first day that we met, which I think was in the Melson lobby, down in the bottom level, and just having this, like, really, like, energetic exchange, and talking with you, and like learning about our similar backgrounds of working with Wonder, or with Dave Hers, and not Wonder. What was it before? It was
Vive family
Vive.
support.
Yeah, Vive. So working with Vive, with Dave Hers, which then became Wonder, having this real deep affinity towards experiential therapy. And then the icing on the top was both being huge fans of Carl Jung and depth psychology, right? And
Yes,
that was
that's right.
like, this is my brother from another mother right here, right? I came all the way across, the country to meet this guy, right? I needed to meet this guy, and that really was like the kind of connective, sinew or tissue,
Yeah.
at that moment, and it's kind of produced a really wonderful relationship. And you know for those again listening, Wes, invited me over to his office one day to come check it out. Maybe it was another time too. I think I'd gone a couple times, and he shared his vision of eternal strength and kind of where he was and where he wanted to go. And I was just enamored. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's doing it, right? He's doing the thing that I want to do. And then this guy goes, hey, what are your thoughts on being a part of this? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, one, I was so honored and so humbled, dude. I was like, it took me a minute. I was like, wow, this is a fucking opportunity right here, man. Like, to do something beautiful, to be working with youth in this way, the experiential model, and like, oh man, I was almost in that, and then I was like, I just pay attention. I'm like, no, I know where my heart is right now. And like, I know that there's something in me that it needs to bring something forward, right? And produce something and bring something into this world that is genuine to my endeavors and my work and my story, right? And the things that I'm trying to accomplish as well. And like, I couldn't lose track of that. And
Yeah.
as much as I wanted to kind of join you in your, your mission, and because again, there's so much overlap there. I was like, nah, I gotta say no, right? And
But I'm so glad you did. And I mean it from the standpoint of I know what that feels like. That internal, this is my baby and I have to go build it and bring it to life so that I can flush it out fully. And if I step and put my energy anywhere else in any capacity, it will take away from that. And so
mhm,
I'm glad that you stayed on track and that you're building this beautiful work that you're doing. I want to bring it back if I can, Kurt, like what
yeah,
you were saying about nature.
yeah,
Um, it's interesting coming from this training, man. So many times you become aware of how you speak. And so oftentimes we talk about our relationship with nature. And then people would be like, isn't that interesting that we already make a division as if we're not nature?
mhm.
Um, but when you were talking about it, it made me think of Ernest Becker's work, um, The Denial of Death.
Denial of death.
Yeah. And in it, man, he's got one of the coolest quotes when you were talking about Kennesaw Mountain and you were talking about how there was so much calmness and peace and internal kind of equilibrium that you would feel when you went there, I would feel, but yet it was this land and this territory of horrific bloodshed and battles and turmoil. And so I started to think symbolically in a way where it was a battlefield for my own
Mm,
um, demons, my own spiritual warfare that I was fighting internally and trying to work through. But then, man, I thought about this Ernest Becker quote, which I love, man. It's a quick one, but he just says, oh, and now it jumps away. Come on, where was it? I was looking for the whole quote, and I couldn't find it, man. But he says, Mother Nature is a brutal bitch, red in tooth and claw, who destroys what she creates.
mhm,
And I liked it though because it didn't treat ecology and nature as only through these rose colored glasses where it was like everything in nature is like peaceful, like it's a fucking Disney movie with Bambi and butterflies and everything's cool. It's like, no, man, you get the whole ecosystem. You get the entire duality of life, bloodshed, loss, um, hunger, primordial energies. It's all embedded. And if you pay
yep,
enough attention, it's happening all around you when you're hiking in the soil, in the plants, in the trees, and in like there is simultaneous life and vitality and death and destruction occurring all around you all the time, which I think brings me back to what Gregory Bateson said, which is the biggest problems in the world lie in the difference between how nature works and how man thinks.
mm,
And that piece of we don't want to see that duality. We don't want to look at pain and death and destruction and entropy, we really want to cling to only seeing one aspect.
Mm.
But how much healing, tranquility, and catharsis arises from looking at the pain, working
Yeah.
with the shadow, integrating the things that we fear. And now you're
Yeah.
to Jung and Campbell, and
Yeah.
the treasure you seek lies in the cave you fear to enter the most.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so beautiful. Thank you for bringing that quote in, and yeah, and then for highlighting these duality and these pieces here. It's like what it makes me reflect on what is w- when we see it holistically in that way, when we see the death, the destruction, and in juxtaposition to the life and creativity, it's like why does that matter for us, right? To be able to see that. What does that do to the human being and to the collective when we can more fully embrace that more just again darker side, right? Not just not to place a kind of certain label, right? But just to kind of qualify that darkness, right? But what does that do for us? And like the innermost cave, why is that important for us? But I think when those words that you kind of share, right, when you're talking about the soil and you're talking about the things happening underneath the soil, I had the image of like de, you know decomposition, right, a breaking down, right? And I think that there's something symbolic in the idea of death and destruction and in this chaos and in the way that things get decomposed. And when I think about the way our psyche is connected into nature in this way, right, that our very being is connected, is when we become more fully aware of this decomposition, we're recognizing that things internally, our parts of our psyche are breaking down, right? And I think what that does for us is in the kind of breakdown, it kind of allows us to kind of see things with greater clarity and kind of the in-betweenness of these parts that are breaking down. And then we're able to, I think, and this is one of the beautiful parts of the consciousness here, when we bring in the conscious aspect of this, is we can infuse meaning into what's the in between, right? And to build that up in a way that I hope is it brings more fulfillment in life, more sense of love, more appreciation, greater existential meaning. But it's something about like we need to be able to deconstruct, decompose ourselves in order to reformulate our thinking, our feeling aspects in a more broad, more holistic sense. And that's the essence of what it is to be a human of nature, right? Nature within human. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the idea that without decomposition, and I love that term, but without a breakdown, a dying off of um, a death, you don't get a birth. And so they're intrinsically linked in that way, where for something to be born and come into existence anew, you
Mm,
need certain things to decompose or to break down or to reconfigure and transmutate in particular ways. And I just think it's so hard for us to see that because of the narratives and the agreements that we have around preservation of life.
mm,
We start from when we're young. It's like death, and talking about it, it becomes something that again we just kind of compartmentalize,
mm,
and the whole of life is to survive and avoid death, and we
mm,
fear it and we don't want to work with it. But then you see Eastern practices really work on an integration and an understanding of it. Man, I was watching something that was really beautiful. My good buddy just recently lost his 19-year-old son unexpectedly on Father's Day, and
mm,
he's my dear friend. And so I've been sitting with him in whatever way I can, in humility, in just being there, and us reconnecting. but he does music and hip hop. And KRS-One, one of the old school like OG rappers, put up something about anytime we lose a loved one, mom, dad, brother, son, it is an opportunity, and that person has crossed over and we now have a guide in the spirit realm, and through their death in this material realm, they are alive in another realm that we are tethered to and can use for guidance. And so it's this beautiful, but I think about how that's not a standard narrative often, and we really like to cling to, it's only here if I can see it. And we don't do a tremendous amount of work with the unseen and the things that vibrationally and energetically are still there and we feel a presence of. But just that whole idea of, I listen to Alan Watts talk about it, and every time, that's what I want, Kurt. On my deathbed, if you can find me and you know where I'm at, I tell everybody this: play Alan Watts. That's the only thing that calms me down, dude. Maybe Ram Dass like a little bit, but like, dude, Alan Watts just puts me. Alan Watts gets me ready to be like, cool. I've died 1,000 times, dude. We've all died. The whole of life is an on and off switch, and he just starts to talk about it in the most poignant way. So yeah, it's how can nature and our awareness and consciousness, our conscious awareness of nature, teach us everything that we need to know about this journey and about existence if we can listen and immerse with nature in a way where we see it and experience it. And I wonder if that's what was pulling you to Kennesaw, and what was pulling me to Kennesaw was I was lost. I was overwhelmed. I was lost. I couldn't get tethering, and that grounded me in such a deep way. And we hear it when people say like, oh, go take your shoes off and do grounding and there's new like practices. But man, you feel it. If you go spend time in nature and you get away from technology, you feel a stillness and a spirit and an essence that it will begin to, it's almost as if it breathes into your nervous system, and your nervous system starts to mirror that pacing, that speed that nature's in, which is much more balanced. Even with the chaos, even with the destruction, it's much more in tune.
Yeah, man. I actually, this morning, I hopped over, I got here really early, and I hopped over across the street and jumped on the trail, which leads to this beautiful meadow, right? So it's on the backside of Kennesaw Mountain. And this meadow is huge, right? In a circular shape. And you kind of, the trail can take, so you could, the main trail will take you around the meadow, or you can kind of cut through the trees and go enter through this threshold. There's like this gateway, this portal, 2 trees that you then can step into this meadow. And it's, again, kind of the boundary of the forest, right? All around you, beautiful meadow. And then in the middle, there's a grove of trees, a circle. I found this place, man. Like when I first signed the lease and I jumped across the street, I walked into this place and I was like, there's something magical here, man. There's something sacred around this space. And as I stepped closer, I saw this cluster of trees, and I was like, this is a circle, like a legitimate perfect circle in the middle of the meadow. I'm like, someone planted this here. Like, this is not just kind of a natural way in which trees form. Although some beliefs, some people in kind of the druid faith or kind of animistic faith believe that maybe it's called a tree ring that's made by fairies, right? So they kind of construct the sacred space. And I'm not gonna rule that out. I think there's something to that. But something planted this circular grove, and it had this vibrancy, this magnetism to it, man. It was like, there's something sacred about this place. And I step into the middle and I'm like feeling it, right? And there's like this low, like frequency. There's this low resonance. And as I'm looking around, I'm like, these aren't just normal trees. Like these trees are juniper trees. The juniper is not native in Georgia.
Mm.
And that just kind of blew me away. And then I was like, fucking that the juniper tree is like, that's a very symbolic, very meaningful tree to me. There's a history of my relationship that I've cultivated with the juniper tree that goes back my days in Utah when I spent time in the desert, backpacking, camping, but even more importantly, when I was working wilderness therapy with adolescents who had been sent away to this wilderness therapy program, and our field was in the desert, and junipers abound, right? And sagebush, but mainly the juniper was like the main tree that could survive in
Wow.
the desert. And I had some really, really sacred moments, out there in the field, and especially one on when I did my first solo backpacking experience, and having this really spiritual moment with the juniper tree, sitting at the base and praying to it, and really feeling just this profound peace and calmness. And that's it. There's a story there. And again, I'm like, we can drop it at any point, some of these, but subsequently the juniper showed up in my life, in very meaningful ways. And so much so that I've actually, written a spiritual autobiography that the juniper tree is named as one of my chapters,
No way.
because of how important it is. And so here I am, I'm standing in the middle of this grove in Kennesaw Mountain in the south, where this shit don't grow. And I'm like, it's hard. I mean, I want to be like egocentric in that way and be like, this is for me. Like, this is, it's something special here, but it's not, but it is because it's meaningful to me.
Well,
Right.
and I was going to say, in the ways that it is for everyone, there is still a synchronicity that brought you by just closing your eyes and following your intuition, finding the space 4 years after it was unavailable, now getting it, now just knowing, like almost like blindfolded walking. It's like the old martial arts movies, dude.
Yeah.
Like where you're just only using your senses, and then to take that off to wander into that place and be surrounded by
Mm.
5 friends that you've had massive intuitive, internal, spiritual, cathartic experiences with. Talk about home
Mm.
and ecology. It's like you are home.
Yeah.
And those friends just telling you and surrounding you and be like, welcome home. And you
Yeah.
being like, oh my God, I never thought you guys would be here. I didn't even think like it's beautiful, man.
It's beautiful, man. That was beautifully said too, right there. Yeah. I that definitely resonates right there.
How can people get a hold of your autobiography,
I
man?
that's not a complete quite yet, right?
Okay.
I haven't pumped that one out yet. I have the basic structure. I have each chapter written, but it's not written yet to the
Okay.
point where I'm ready to kind of put it out there. But it's interestingly too, it ties into the work here, right, at a praxis. And interestingly, of course, it does, right? Because part of this goal here is not just about infusing nature, bringing nature into therapy, as a mode of healing, and um, it is, but it's more than just the way I think we traditionally and even modern times think about ecotherapy as like it's again this place of restoration, where a lot of the literature, a lot of the focus, or some of it is about like how it helps with our physiology or helps with our, being immersed in the forest. Like forest bathing helps bring our immune or raise our immune system up and brings our stress levels down. And there's a lot of really great research around that, but I think the thing that's lacking is really to emphasize the spiritual nature of what happens when we, cultivate our nature, in nature, right, and kind of a very horticultural way, right? To tend to our inner garden through our immersion in nature, is there's a spiritual quality to it. And that absolutely is an essence of what I want to bring into the work here is, addressing how spirit is innate in nature and spirit is innate in us, and that I want to reformulate our thinking in this way that breaks. And this is again part of why we're talking about a praxis being the movement towards overcoming or liberation out of this solo self, this egocentric self that disconnected from you, from others, from nature. That when we can reimagine, I talked about psyche a little bit, but if we can reconceptualize just the way that we see nature, the way we see ourselves from a place that's more, probably more akin to, I would say, like animism, where this worldview looks at that there's everything in life, everything in nature is not just consciousness, but is a mindedness, and it has this energetic spirit-like quality to it, and that we need to rethink how we even think about nature. That nature is not just this amalgamation of these material objects or these material things like atoms and neutrons or protons, and it's a whole. I'm trying to think of the best way to put it.
You said
they are those things, but they're more than that, right?
absolutely.
I mean, that those things are manifestations from, and this is the animist worldview, that those things are emanations or manifestations from this kind of primordial of no thing, right? There's this abyss, this blackness that contains all energy, all potential matter, but it really exists at kind of an energetic level. And that through through energetic patterns, that it then kind of this kind of cyclical nature of this energy, then it emerges into this kind of cohesiveness that forms into protons or neutrons, and then that kind of continues to kind of form the building blocks of what nature and what the cosmos is. It's so everything is contained within this no thing space, this nothing space, and it quite literally it needs to be reimagined as like a spiritual kind of endeavor, right? That spirit is the animating force of everything. And if we can reformulate our thinking around this and see that it will then be clear that we are not separate from nature, from others, but we are all a part of it in some capacity.
Absolutely.
And I very much want to kind of bring that into the work and into the experiences and part of the discussions that we have when we do group therapy out there, is to kind of bring people to that kind of level of awareness.
Dude, Kurt, do you know how grateful I am for you, man? I mean it, dude. Well, I was listening to you talk, and what immediately showed up for me was maybe a lineage or a practice as sacred as yoga, and how over the years it has been co-opted and turned into, in certain yoga studios, something that loses all of its historical richness, its lineage, its understanding, its deeper meaning and purpose, and it's just been marketed as this thing. And so you'll watch people who study and practice yoga and have no chain link to the evolution that of how it came to be and what it represents, and especially what you touched upon, the spiritual essence and embodiment of it being the birth portal for everything that manifests from it. So when I see you doing ecopsychology, I think that's another field that could very easily, if you watch enough fucking TikToks, pardon my language, but like you'll just get people who are like, oh yeah, great, this is nature, this is what nature does for your psyche, this is an ice bath and a sauna and grounding, and we need to rewild, and it can be these very quick things next thing you know, it becomes, $7.99 a month, and it's this program, and you do it this way. And did you make sure that you rewilded before you watched your Netflix series? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because,
Yeah.
and when I listen to you talk, I'm so grateful for the depth, the understanding, the reverence, the appreciation, the respect that you have for ecology, for the roots of ecology, for where it grew from, and for its origins, connecting to psychology and healing, and how you're continuing to think through those things. It's not
Mm.
like you're sitting over here claiming, eco psychology is this and we do it this way and it's always going to look like that. You're really trying to create an ever moving, ever flowing becoming of where is our culture right now? Where are we? How do we see psyche? How do we see mind? How do we begin to, create new patterns of conscious awareness and thought to immerse ourselves? Is just beautiful,
Yeah.
articulated,
Yeah.
so much more depth oriented. And for people who want that, it's there. And it's a beautiful entry point too for people who may feel intimidated by that. It's also like, let's just go and experientially engage with it. You don't have to, be able to write a theoretical paper about it or understand these depth things. There's a way for you to come do this work and to feel it,
Mm.
and to go from that space to start to learn more about it and more about yourself simultaneously. I think it's
Hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love what you're saying about that state of becoming, right? That it's not like that we're trying to sell or promote this sense of like, you come and experience this, and we'll give you these opportunities of experience. We'll educate you in these ideas, and give you this experience in nature. But that you join in this process, and it is a process of individuality and communal becoming, right? That just as much as it is for me in my journey right now, that I know I haven't arrived, and I probably won't ever have arrived until I arrive at death, right? And then but that it is a state, a kind of a flux of being and becoming. Because I do think there is this kind of sense at times where we're being, and then we're in a state of becoming. But I think that that's where we want to be joining with others, is in a state of becoming. I think that's what's beautiful about religion in a way, is that it's a communal place for people to come together to become as a whole body, right? But individually, but as well as a community. And that's something that we've lost, in our modern day as well. Just the fracturing of religion and the fall away from religion and religious attendance. I heard recently, I don't remember who it was, but it was at this evolution of psychotherapy conference. One of the speakers say, like, because of this kind of this modern problem of uh, religiosity just kind of being, just has going through a transformation or de-evolution, is as therapists, psychologists, as educators, healers, it's our role to kind of step in to become more of these kind of clergy members, right?
Mm.
To be able to bring people together in a collective, in a communal way, the way in which people were doing it before, but it's just lost its meaning. And it's our responsibility, especially so, to even break out of this isolated process of one-on-one individual therapy or couples therapy. It's like, no, we need to stretch ourselves out into the world more and bring community in. And that's a big feature here, is that what we're trying to accomplish
It's
is to build
beautiful.
community around this stuff. And
Yeah.
in a very similar way, what you're saying is, what happens then when we can reimagine our relationality with one another in the natural world? What can we become, right? What can we grow into? And I think that really, I think, speaks to your mission and your purpose and your goal of, very much in this, even with this warm data stuff, is a
Absolutely.
similar thing.
Yep. Yeah. You talk about sacred spaces of communal connection, and but you also have me thinking, if we have to be the clergymen, I want to be that cool preacher that's screaming in like a silk suit and wiping my forehead and like, "Hey, come on, come on." And I want the congregation up there and just being, or dude, if I got to pick, I'd probably be like, who was homeboy Gerard Butler in Machine Gun Preacher. Did you ever watch that movie? Oh my God, dude.
No.
I guess it's like a true story, man. But he was a ex-heroin addict, and then he creates his own church, but he goes to Sierra Leone and he sees just the horrific poverty, and then he wants to build a school. But at one point, dude, he keeps coming back to the States and he's like tripping on people. He's like, "Do you really want to help?" And he's just he's like over the top with it. Machine Gun Preacher, it's an awesome movie. But
Machine Gun Preacher, I gotta check that.
But Kurt, you're right. I think warm data has been this beautiful invitation to focus on the relationships and focus on the potentiality that exists in the relationships that we don't even recognize how powerful that is. And so when you talk about, what lies in the potentiality, what can we communicate when we join with one another? And that gets into not only on an energetic level, on a vibrational level, on a spirit level, how are we influencing and impacting one another in our relationships with one another? And that's where I hear kind of like the voice of Russell Brand, who's always like, don't get it twisted. He always talks about AA and recovery. And he's like, look, you're either working a conscious program or you're working an unconscious program. And that's where I would say, in that same vein, you're always in relationship. I don't care how isolated you may be from humanity. If you're engaging with technology, if you're engaging with food, if you're engaging with whatever your environment is, you're in relationship.
Always.
And internally, your own physiological being is in relationship with itself. From organs, cellularly, your microbiome, your guttural bacteria, your neurotransmitters, everything is in relationship. And so the beautiful potentiality of becoming that exists and looking at those relationships is so important. And like you said, maybe we can use terms like a reconfiguring, a conscious, I know I keep saying conscious awareness, but like an attunement, an alignment. And then you made me think a lot when you brought up spirituality about Spinoza and immanence. And the idea, and I love Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari and their work, but they Deleuze really integrates a lot of Spinoza's work with immanence. And my understanding of immanence, the plane of immanence, is that it's everything. So when you kind of talk about animism and the no thing, immanence would just be everything that is.
Yeah.
And in that is nature, is God, is existence, is creative life force, is birth, death, decay, like that. Everything that exists springs forth from the plane of immanence.
That's a great word right there. That's the same. That's putting a word to the thing of the no thing, right? It's the immanence for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just, that I used to fight that. I didn't like that conceptual framework because I think I really aligned with a transcendent spirituality, a God, or a being that was separate from myself. And now in my own spiritual growth work, I really just like immanence, to find God in all that is, and to recognize that these are just different variations of God or existence or Mother Gaia or whatever you want to call it. And Alan Watts says, when you can find God in a paper cup, when you see it all around you because it's everything that exists, and you recognize you are it and everyone else is it. And I'm reading this, practicing this text, Course in Miracles, that I really love. And one of the practices, one of the daily devotions was, all things are echoes of the voice of God.
Mm.
And I really love that meditation and that practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, I would even challenge you a little bit on that transcendent thing. I think that you can still have a conceptualization of transcendence from this eminence perspective, right? That it is a transcendent quality to go beyond the ego, right? To go beyond this sense of self, and to be able to connect with this eminence, right? That for me, that's the essence of transcendence.
Beautiful.
But I think I understand. I mean, the transcendent,
Dude, it's
the way in
scholars.
which
The
we
scholars and the
ascend.
academics would be like, I'm not
Yeah,
so sure.
yeah,
I believe they're diametrically opposed. But then my own phenomenological experience is exactly what you described, where it's like, man, call it what you want. When I'm in tune, I'm in tune. And
yeah,
that feels like it could come from transcendent visioning, imaginary realm, deep meditations, guided meditations, dream work, but is also embedded in the imminent here and now of everything that is.
well, I think about, I mean, again, I think Jung's conceptual framework for individuation, right, of like the ascension and the descension, right? Like, and I don't remember the quote, I always butcher it, but something to the effect of, in the individuation process, it's our roots have to kind of go deep into the earth and into hell to really to have this individuation, right? And so the transcendent is both a kind of ascending and descending process.
Mm.
Um, and I had a thought there. I wanted to kind of connect that to where did that go? Where did that disappear to? Yoga. You mentioned yoga, right? And I love being able to kind of bring some of this Eastern philosophy or Eastern spiritualism into this concept that challenging this Western notion of transcendence is about ascendance, right? It's like really the goal here is to go beyond the body because the body is just inherently it's sinful and wrong, right? And that's our spiritual quest is to go beyond the body. And no, man, I mean, for me at least, absolutely not. Like our embodiment is the thing that we're addressing here today is our embodiment is about the way in which in a very sensorial way that we can connect with or that we are embedded into our surroundings, right? And that when we can drop into the body more in that descending like quality, then that gives us greater access to this life force, this spiritualism, this as the yogis say, this prana, this life energy that is in here, out here. There's no separation. It's all a kind of fluid, kind of flowing state of dynamic energy. And if when we can drop into our body, that gives us the capacity and the potentiality to have these transcendent qualities. And I think one framework that I've personally become more curious about in both literature as well as my own experiences is kundalini yoga. And this notion of there is these this energy that can be released from the base of your spine, that can have like this ascending like kind of quality where it goes up through the chakras, activates these different chakras, and it does ascend. But it's again, it's not about this ascension purely beyond. It's about being able to kind of reimagine that this essence within that's ascending is also extending out into the world,
Mm.
right? And yogis who've claim to have had these kundalini awakenings or kundalini experiences is it has a transcendent quality as it in the way that the consciousness gets expanded out into the world beyond the body but still a part of the body.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I see that as transcendent, and I
Yeah.
see that as one of the goals that I'm trying to promote here too is in that kind of state of being able to kind of feel into the world more maybe this actually connects with the ecology of mind that you mentioned earlier in the last podcast, but that when we can identify ourselves by through the energy, through that kind of essence, that prana-like energy, then we can expand the way we identify in the world,
Mm.
and that we can reformulate a sense of self and identity through our expansion into the world in this way, that that kind of lends itself to this notion of the ecological self. It's the self that is inherently embedded and interconnected into its surroundings. And when we can access this through, I think of one portal, one way to do that is through love, through open heart centeredness, that we will, one, gain a lot more meaning, value, purpose, fulfillment in our life. And I think that extends out into the world in a way that it infuses or touches and it connects with other people or into the world, into the spirit of the world, into a greater harmonious place. And that's what we need to strive towards, is this harmony and this harmoniousness. And the only way to do that is to kind of expand ourselves in a state of love into the world.
Absolutely. And as you described it, Kurt, talking about kundalini, one word to kind of use, but awakening, it became like cyclical, where I saw it, where it's like, yes, it is an ascension, but it's to birth out into the universe and then to get that energy in a feedback loop back and to just continue and have it do that. And there was this beautiful, I'll send it to you, but it was really unique. It's a TikTok, man.
Yeah.
And he's talking about kundalini, and he goes into the history and science and the study of breath and the nervous system and kundalini work, and it all tying back to the grounding and the balancing and the reawakening of an equilibrium with your nervous system, and how out of tune that can be when we're not doing that type of spiritual grounding work, breath work, meditation, prayer. But again, to your point, I love how you said the interconnectivity, the interrelationality. I really think a lot of this is us breaking down historically negative compartmentalizations. It's just been, everything's built on the back of scientific reductionism, and that's made it very hard for us to think holistically. So we oftentimes we make things separate when in reality they are not, and they're intertwined and they're enmeshed and they're influencing and impacting one another. So even when we use that term mind, we think my individual idiosyncratic mind. But when you start to pay attention to the thoughts you have and the emotions you have, you recognize that they are in relationship to your experiences in the world, the people that you're talking to, the things that you're consuming. And so it is this, it's never completely interior or exterior. There can never be, it's almost such an abstract line that we've drawn. It's the same thing as when you fucking like drive over the Florida state line. It would be like me driving over the Florida line being like, now I'm in Florida, now I'm in Georgia, now I'm in Florida. What about if I get really microscopic? Where am I right now? Right here. But we live by it, where we're like, no, this is body and this is mind. And you're like, oh, are you sure? Because when we really start to look at it, body and mind are inherently interwoven and connected with such connective tissue that they can never be pulled apart. And you can't pull apart, biochemistry and neurochemistry, and you can't pull apart immunology and neurology, and you can't pull apart, mind and spirit. And it's like nature and nurture. And so, like, let's look at the connective tissue. Let's understand the relationships. Let's start to pour energy into examining the relationships and the unseen. Again, Nora Bateson's Afani Poesis, like, let's look at the things that we haven't been giving attention to see if we can glimmer more and change the way that we think and experience our world. That inherently is going to change who we are and how we are in our world.
Yeah, man. Yeah. This body-mindedness, right? This fusion. I mean, the fact that it's not separate, even though we try to see it as separate, but it makes me think about going back a little bit to you, the term you were using. It was something about something Genesis. I don't remember the term you used earlier. What was that? Schismogenesis. Yeah. When you were referencing that earlier, it made me think about, and again, I'm thinking about the word ontogenesis. Wait, ontogenesis. Which is basically also our ontogenetics, but there's an ontogenesis here that talks about, and I think it was Ralph Metzner, maybe. Again, I don't know if that's him, so don't quote me on this, but he talks about this idea, or I think he talks about this idea that our ontology, is so bound up in our bodies, right? Into that it's historically back in the hunter-gatherer times, or pre-industrial revolution, or I guess probably generations before, our ontology was basically like our very essence of being was embedded in the body and the body's relationship to the world, right? And the world of the animals and the trees and the plants and the cosmos, and that and it was very much connected into the way in which we felt into the world, right? And felt into the cosmos, so that derived a place of of what our meaning was in relationship to these things. And he proposes that, again, if this is Metzner, I'm going to go back and check this later, that our modern times, through this schism is what he calls is a ontogenetic crippling. So that that we have kind of crippled ourselves from having this sensorial experience, this feeling into the world in a way that reflects back into the very nature of our being, right? That we've disconnected ourselves fundamentally in mindedness, and again, in how we see these things, that it has crippled us. It has created an atrophy of sorts of our senses.
Yeah.
And that's so paramount right now. And you actually think about the modern crisis of technology addiction, and kids being raised from birth on to be glued to a screen. They are losing contact with the world in ways that, again, I don't think it's necessarily about technology is bad and nature's good. And I think it's about this habituation of not using your body fully in the world. And kids are kind of habituated to not be accessing their full sensorial capacities here, and they're being truncated. They're atrophying themselves by sitting at home, being on the iPad, being on video games. They're losing this quality, this essence of their being, by bringing their body into more kind of full relationality with their surroundings.
Yeah. Oh man, I know. I think about I mean, it's a beautiful what do you say, ontological crippling and
Ontogenetic crippling.
Ontogenetic crippling, man. Yeah, and you wonder, because we can curate any sensory experience we want. And again, this is the perpetual pleasure chasing and the avoidance of discomfort and pain. But you, as I know, some of my most elated moments have come from pain and discomfort. And working out is a great example of that. Every time I enter into the space where I've been sedentary and tired and exhausted, and I don't want to move my body and I don't want to awaken it, but I go and I do that for even 20 minutes, swinging some kettlebells, jogging, doing a couple burpees, turning on some music. Oh, I'm on fire.
Yeah.
My whole
Yeah.
body's lit up cellularly, blood flow. And now I'm starting to get more creative. And I'm wanting to like text certain people. And then a thought pops up and I want to write on something. And I'm like, holy crap, what are the implications when we begin to disassociate from our bodies, to atrophy and not utilize? And from a sensory standpoint, we really are turning off certain senses and just turning on others. And it reminds me a lot of stimulant medication, where it's like
Yep.
that's what our culture values is: prefrontal cortex, neocortex, analytical mind, efficiency, productivity, think, and fuck felt sense and imagination and creative play and awareness. In that sense, we don't value that because it doesn't bring monetary gain. We need you to be as efficient and productive and operate in this. And they've done a lot of studies with the stimulant medication where they've recognized there's very little creativity and imagination that is happening in those particular centers of the brain. So again, I think it's back to what can we do to awaken our bodies, to respect them, and to recognize that housed in the awakening of the body is a slew of beautiful creativity that comes to the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the essence then of what we're trying to accomplish at a praxis. And particularly there's two different programs here that currently, so one, like we talked about last time, is the excursions. We talked about that briefly, but there's another one that I'm currently developing that hasn't launched yet, that really kind of speaks to these things right here. And this is the program called Base Camp. So we
Cool.
have, again, Praxis is our center, and Base Camp is a program. It's a program for emerging adults, and it utilizes these ideas that emerging adults nowadays are lost in transition. They're confused. They're having existential crises. There's this ontogenetic crippling effect that we're experiencing, and even to that other point, real quick, ontogenetic crippling also emphasizes that, again, our body is, in this ontology, is a state of becoming, but it's also, it's biologically bound, that we're kind of crippled from really fully maturing and kind of I guess, yeah, maturing, and that's critical stage of emerging adulthood, is where we have this kind of genesis like experience and development. And so if we are disconnected from others and from the world, and feeling, separate from and isolated from, we're not allowing this kind of underpinning, this biology, to kind of fully mature in a way, which is important for the developmental process, to become an adult. So take that idea that emerging adults are, there's a portion of them, at least, not, this is not true for all, that need to be re-engaged into the world and with others in ways that will help them along their journey to adulthood. So Base Camp is created to do that. And we
Awesome.
do that by creating, community, by creating a space here, both within the center as well as space externally, across the street. We'll also be doing excursions locally, within the state of Georgia and then beyond. But what we do is it's kind of a fusion hybrid of, it's not quite an intensive outpatient program. There's not that many hours a week dedicated to it, but it's something a little less than. And so it would be, individual therapy, 2 group therapy sessions a week, where one is a kind of psychoeducational group on topics of like, you know, selfhood, boundaries, interpersonal effectiveness, regulating, your nervous system, like getting more embodied, kind of the sensorial stuff. as well as like using this thing called design your life, so it's kind of a hands-on way to kind of formulate a life worth living that you can set goals towards and move towards some end goal that has some real deep meaning to you. And then it's about the adventure therapy. So it's taking these ideas, of the psychoeducational stuff, learning how to regulate yourself, learn how to like be in relationship, and then it's going out and doing adventures and utilizing some of those things, because we know that when we go do adventures, we put ourselves in a state of kind of panic or uncomfortability. So we need to know, we need to have the foundation to learn how to regulate ourselves in these uncomfortable situations. So therefore, then the adventure therapy or the adventure exercises or activities are opportunities to dose yourself, to become more confident, in traversing or navigating that challenge, and increase problem solving skills, communication skills, having fun, playing, recreating. And ultimately, the hope here is that the combination of these things will be this kind of force or this energy that will propel you on your life forward, right? To move forward with enough confidence, self-assuredness, with skills to learn how to navigate the ever flowing flux of barriers that are going to come your way, and how to leap over those, or at least scramble over those barriers, right? But at least we're not just giving up. We're moving forward in a supportive container that again really emphasizes community and giving a space for emerging adults to have this, ultimately to have a space to kind of have some kind of existential contemplation and reflection of who am I and what do I want in my life, and then to give them the hands-on experiences to kind of do some of that work.
Beautiful.
So that's coming down the pipeline here. We're going to hopefully have the start date on the 23rd of September, and that marks the equinox, the fall equinox, and that's by design. Cool. The other part of this is these groups will run for 3 months, and it's quarterly. So each group will reflect each season of life, and by design, that is so that it kind of, we use the changing seasons, the flux of seasons that we experience outside of us, quote unquote, as a way to look at how there's seasons within us and how those seasons mirror this process. Like, for example, fall is a time of preparing for winter. It's when the leaves fall. It's when acorns fall off the tree. It's when the ground starts to kind of get prepared for spring, right? So there's this kind of falling away, this thing, things are changing in this kind of going towards death. So it's like about a preparation. So that creates this opportunity for us to kind of look at like, what are things that we need to start preparing for next year? What's the things that are maybe we're a little anticipatory about that are maybe dying away right now, right? And then that leads us into the winter kind of season that reflects death. It reflects like being able to kind of see things differently, right? When you ever have the experience of walking through a forest in winter, a forest maybe you're very familiar with,
yeah,
you can see the forest differently. You can see through with greater clarity. And it gives you a greater perspective of the surroundings, of what's beyond or what's in between. And I think that's a beautiful lesson for us to think about what winter can be in our life as an opportunity to look at things with greater clarity, to have more introspection, self-reflexivity. It's no mistake here that oftentimes we see this. I'm not saying this isn't true, but seasonal affective disorder, where it really reflects depression, right? And what is the nature of depression? It is going inward, right? It's kind of like it forces you to have this real intense kind of self-exploration. Winter provides that for us. And if we can lean into that and do that in a kind of a community in a supportive way, I think that can yield a lot of powerful, productive things for us to see with greater clarity with that things within us that needs greater attention. So these are just some examples of how I see like each group, in each season being an opportunity to learn something new about self and just to be in greater connection with our natural surroundings. And that's kind of how the program is designed currently. Who knows? Maybe it'll change, and as we kind of move on and we grow, maybe it will become something different. But as for now, that's kind of where we see it kind of going right now.
Kurt, it's man, I'm so excited. That was beautiful. I wrote down so much. First, I'll make a couple jokes as I always do, man. But like base camp, you said base camp, and I had a picture of more like boot camp with you with a megaphone, like now, move, move. But on a very serious note, as you describe this awareness, this intention, this attunement to life, to ecology, to ecopsychology, to the seasons of your life, it really brought up for me the balance and the delicate approach that you have to working with young people and emerging young adults, that is very much tethered to Jung and anima and animus, and masculine and feminine energies, and having a sacred respect for each. And Kurt, we're at such a time, I'm sure you see this, but all over social media, these young men are being told the most horrific things about how to be a man, how to get through life. And it's become so linear, so just strong arm it.
Yeah.
Become more, if you can just become a rock and more disciplined and more structured and more this, then you can endure the pain of life. And I think
Mhm.
it's such a wrong approach to take. I even saw something the other day, man, like I work with all these young guys and they're coming in talking about whatever, who's top G, Andrew Tate, is that his name,
Oh,
that guy? Yeah.
yeah, Andrew Tate. Yep.
But dude, somebody the other day, he's a salesman, and I saved the video because it was so ridiculous. He was like, he's standing on stage and he's like, I require everybody at my company to have a six pack. I couldn't stop
Can't
laughing.
make this up. No.
I was like, dude, it's like a SNL skit, man. And he was like, it's called standards. And if you don't have a six pack, you don't work at my company. And I was just like, oh, man.
Holy shit.
Dude, it blew my mind. And I'm watching these young guys who are so exposed to it all the time start to get brainwashed and start to think this is what women want. This is what I need to become, and it's nothing but just a pile of guilt and shame,
Yeah. Yeah.
self-hatred, and them just like
Yeah.
floating in on themselves and having this really unhealthy false narrative that if I can just be a masculine superhero, that my whole life would be easier. And I think I just look at your approach and I'm so grateful for you, especially for emerging young adults, but with the population of young men and emerging young adults, to have stillness, to have appreciation for their emotions, to be able to look within, to be able to really work on a true holistic relationship with masculinity, with femininity, with embodiment, with nature, with seasons. Like it is so needed in so many ways. And all my work is just devoted to the youth. So
Yeah.
anything that can help our youth take back their voice, feel empowered, and move into growth and thriving in a way where they don't feel shamed of who they are or what they feel in their experience of life is so needed. And so for a figure like you to be like, look, man, oh, I am going to push you. and we are going to go into the depths of winter, and you are going to wear, you know what I mean, like the bare skin, and you are going to push yourself, but there's a sacred place of reverence, and you are safe, and we are going to process together, and I'm going to walk alongside you, and we are going to recognize fear, and we will shed tears together, and we will hold one another's hand, and we will recognize that this journey has both, you know. And what it, yeah, so just all that came up for me as you were talking, where I'm like, yes, man, rock and roll, brother.
I'm just, yeah, yeah, I'm just really resonating with what you were just saying, man. Like, it's a celebration, right? It's being able to celebrate, each other's journey, and really to yeah, I mean, I can't even say it as well as you just said it, man. I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's just a celebration of all that stuff, the hardship and the love and the togetherness, but also uh, it's going back to the hero. It's the hero's journey. It is
Absolutely.
their hero's journey, and I just see myself as a mentor along the way, right? And it's being able to step in at various points, and being like, let me help, let me guide in whatever way I can. But yes, it is your journey,
Absolutely.
and we're celebrating that.
That's beautiful. Kurt, let's do this, man. I will, dude, I'd talk to you forever. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to end part 2. And then if we can do a part 3 at some point, I would love to focus on much of what you began to touch on, your own personal spiritual journey, sacred experiences, and kind of where, because now I think there's a deep understanding of your work, of a praxis, what a praxis is doing, but then to understand a little bit more about your own evolution and journey, and how that manifested and created all the beautiful communal work you're doing.
I would love that, man. I would be honored to do that. Yeah, I would love to be able to share some of those pieces of my journey. There's a lot to rejoice in, and there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, but ultimately it is about, like, my own genesis, right? My own kind of becoming through all these things. And yeah, I would love to share. I would love to drop into some of that stuff for sure.
Awesome, brother.
Yeah,
Thank you for
man.
coming. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, dude. Thank you.
Awesome.